No human being has ever set foot on Antarctica without the help of modern technology. Not once in the entire history of our species. But imagine for a moment that one of your ancient ancestors, a hunter-gatherer from 20,000 years ago, someone who had survived ice ages, wolves, and famine, somehow found himself standing at the edge of that frozen continent, completely alone. No fire starter kit, no modern clothing, just the skills his tribe had passed down for generations and his own will to survive. What would actually happen to his body? And more disturbingly, what would happen to his mind? Let's start with what he'd be walking into, because Antarctica isn't just cold. It's the most hostile environment on the planet. The interior of Antarctica averages around -57 degrees Celsius in winter. The lowest natural temperature ever recorded on Earth, -89.2 degrees Celsius, was measured at Vostok Station in 1983. Even in the relatively warmer coastal regions, summer temperatures rarely climb above freezing. Wind speeds regularly exceed 100 kilometers per hour, creating what's known as katabatic wind, dense, freezing air that rushes down from the polar plateau with enough force to knock a person off their feet. Our ancient human would have one advantage most people don't consider. He wasn't soft. Ice Age humans who survived European winters had already adapted to brutal cold, building shelters, reading weather patterns, and using animal hides for insulation. But nothing in his evolutionary toolkit prepared him for this. Ice Age Europe, even at its coldest, rarely dropped below -40 degrees Celsius for extended periods. Antarctica's interior sits in a different category of cold entirely. The first thing to understand is how the human body fails in extreme cold, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages, and each stage strips away a little more of what makes you functional. Stage 1 is mild hypothermia, when core body temperature drops from the normal 37 degrees Celsius down to around 35 degrees Celsius. At this stage, the body still fights back hard. Blood vessels near the skin constrict, redirecting warm blood to protect vital organs. This is why extremities go numb first: fingers, toes, ears, nose. The body is making a calculated sacrifice, protecting the heart and brain at the expense of the parts it considers less essential. Our ancient human, with his experience of cold climates, would recognize these early signs immediately. Numbness, uncontrollable shivering, the urge to move constantly to generate heat. His instincts would push him to keep moving, to find any form of shelter, even something as basic as a depression in the snow that blocks the wind. But here's where his ancient knowledge starts to work against him. Every survival technique he knows depends on resources that simply don't exist in Antarctica. There's no wood for fire, no dry grass for insulation, no animal to hunt for fur or meat. Because outside of the narrow coastal regions with seals and penguins, the interior of Antarctica supports almost no land-based animal life at all. It's often described by researchers as biologically closer to the surface of Mars than to any other place on Earth. This is the moment his 20,000 years of accumulated survival wisdom becomes almost useless. Every tool in his mental toolkit assumes a world with fuel, food, and material to work with. Antarctica offers none of it. As hypothermia progresses into its second stage, core temperature drops further to around 32 to 35 degrees Celsius. This is when things start to go wrong in a way that would be almost impossible for our ancient human to predict or prepare for, because the danger stops being purely physical. It becomes neurological. Blood flow to the brain decreases. Cognitive function begins to deteriorate rapidly. Confusion sets in. Decision-making, the very skill that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations before, begins to fail exactly when he needs it most. Researchers studying moderate hypothermia in modern cold exposure cases have documented a specific and disturbing symptom called paradoxical undressing. As the body's temperature-regulating system breaks down, some victims experience a false sensation of overwhelming heat and begin removing their clothing, accelerating their own death. Search and rescue teams have found hypothermia, victims partially undressed in freezing conditions, having genuinely believed, in their final moments of confused cognition, that they were burning up. If this happened to our ancient human, Everything his instincts had taught him about survival would be actively working against him. The oldest, most deeply ingrained warning systems in his brain would be lying to him. Now let's talk about what would be happening to his mind in a different sense. Not the physical breakdown of hypothermia, but the psychological experience of total isolation. Ancient humans did not evolve to be alone. For nearly the entirety of human history, isolation from the group meant almost certain death. Anthropological research on hunter-gatherer societies consistently shows that humans lived in tight social units of 25 to 150 people, with virtually no individual ever spending more than a few hours completely alone. The human brain developed under conditions of constant social contact. Modern research on extreme isolation gives us a disturbing preview of what our ancient human's mind would experience. Studies conducted on solo polar expedition members, modern humans with full equipment, training, and communication devices, still report significant psychological effects after prolonged isolation in polar environments. Hallucinations, extreme mood destabilization, and what researchers call the long dark, a specific psychological phenomenon linked to prolonged periods without sunlight, common during Antarctic winter, where the near-total absence of daylight disrupts circadian rhythms so severely that some researchers develop depression-like symptoms within weeks. Our ancient human would have none of the psychological preparation modern polar researchers receive. He would have no framework for understanding why his mind was beginning to unravel. In hunter-gatherer cultures, extended isolation combined with sensory deprivation and extreme stress has historically been associated with visions and altered mental states, often interpreted by these cultures as spiritual encounters or ancestor visitations. If our ancient human began hallucinating from cold, exhaustion, and isolation, he likely wouldn't understand it as a physiological breakdown. He would interpret it through the only framework available to him, the spiritual and supernatural belief systems of his tribe. There's also the matter of light itself. Depending on the season, Antarctica experiences either 24-hour daylight or 24-hour darkness for extended periods. Ancient humans, whose entire concept of time and rhythm was built around a consistent day-night cycle, would face a sensory experience with no precedent in their evolutionary history. Circadian rhythm disruption of this severity has been shown, even in modern controlled studies, to cause significant psychological distress within a matter of days. So, how long would he actually survive? Realistically, without any modern equipment, survival time would likely be measured in hours, not days. Cold water immersion studies and cold exposure survival data suggest that in temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius, without adequate shelter, unprotected exposure can lead to severe hypothermia and death within as little as 2 to 6 hours, depending on wind chill, humidity, and physical exertion. If he found immediate shelter, a natural ice formation blocking wind, for example, and used every scrap of ancient survival knowledge available to him, he might extend that window. But without fuel for fire, without food, and without any realistic path to finding either, his fate would ultimately be decided by a countdown measured in single-digit hours. And this is what makes the thought experiment so unsettling. This wasn't a weak or unprepared person. This was someone who had already survived some of the harshest conditions our species has ever faced. Ice ages, famine, predators, and the total absence of modern medicine. His body had been shaped by tens of thousands of years of adaptation to exactly this kind of environmental extreme, and it still wouldn't be enough. Antarctica represents something almost unique in human history, an environment so hostile that even the accumulated survival knowledge of the entire human species, refined over hundreds of thousands of years, provides almost no meaningful advantage. It is one of the only places on Earth where human ingenuity, resilience, and evolutionary adaptation collectively fail within the span of a single afternoon. It took modern humans until 1911 to successfully reach the South Pole, and even then, one of the 2 expeditions that raced to get there, led by Robert Falcon Scott, ended in the deaths of the entire team on the return journey, despite having modern equipment, food supplies, and detailed navigation. If a fully modern, prepared expedition team could still lose the fight against Antarctica in 1911, an ancient human with nothing but instinct and experience from a different world entirely would never have stood a chance. It's a strange thing to realize. For a species that conquered nearly every environment on Earth, deserts, jungles, mountains, Arctic tundra, there was one place, hiding at the bottom of the map, that simply refused to be survived without help from the very technology that took our species 300,000 years to build.